Hello, friends of the paranormal. This is your co-host, Stu, and I'm here with the paranormalist, Patty Wilson. Patty, how's tricks?
Doing pretty good so far.
Good, good. I hope you're enjoying your fall foliage.
Well, we're getting there. Next weekend starts Fall Foliage Weekend in Bedford, PA. Anybody who's within driving distance, be aware of the fact that there will be mobs and mobs and mobs of people there, but it's because there's all kinds of cool stuff going on and tons of vendors. So for the next 2 weekends, that's where I will end up because I work at the Fort Bedford Museum on those weekends. And we're looking forward to lots of folks dropping by and saying hello.
Leafers! Alrighty. And again, I mentioned, fall is not my favorite time of year, although it's better than winter. So I'm just going to plod along, and along with my duties of plodding along, besides doing the editing and publishing of the podcast episodes, we'd like to thank anyone who has found us. If you're new listeners or viewers, please consider clicking subscribe and the like button down below. Everything Paranormalist podcast related, the links for those will be down in the description, including our email address. So please send us email if you're so inclined. And with that, because I don't know, this isn't a part two. Part two was over last week. So
That's right.
What's our topic for today?
It is Black-Eyed Children.
Part two?
No, we're doing some new stories of the Black-Eyed Children.
Okay.
Something new that has come up, an interesting development in the Black-Eyed Children tales.
Okay, because then it wasn't too long ago that we did another episode, but I felt we probably could have done more. So evidently you did as well.
Well, there's so many stories, and then I came across this whole new things that are getting a lot more interesting, if you will. So I thought I'd share some of the stories and then kind of explain what I'm talking about. So if you think you know all there is to know about Black-Eyed Children, sit back because some crazy new stuff has come out.
All right. Well, I'm going to enjoy my coffee, and as like we used to say in the when I was in the Air Force, I have my forward supply point of coffee, so I'm ready to be entertained.
Okay, so the first story is that these are going to be some background stories. So the Black-Eyed Children really came into purview in about 1994. And if you go back to the other episode, I tell the story of the reporter who had the first encounter with the Black-Eyed Children that kind of broke the internet, if you will. He wrote to a forum because he had had this experience, and people began to write in and say, oh my gosh, I've had that experience too, or my sister's cousins, nieces, and nephew told this story years ago, and stuff like that. So it suddenly hit the world of the internet. Some people will tell you it is an urban legend, some will tell you it's folklore. There are some interesting paradoxes, if you will, with this particular subject. The stories always contain a couple elements. The first element is that they require permission to come into your home, your vehicle, anything like that. And the second is that, as obviously their eyes are black or they're empty holes. That's kind of a new thing coming out. That's not the thing I'm referencing. And they have no iris at all. And the third thing that they do is they almost always have either a hoodie or something clothing-wise over their heads, or some way to kind of hide their face until they want you to see them. And they bring also a sense of absolute mortal terror. One of the things that I've been noticing is people telling the stories, they start out with, I just had this horrible sense of dread. I knew I shouldn't have fill in the blank. And then it's like a premonition, a preview or something, that something bad's about to happen and your spidey sense is kind of kicking up. So we're going to start with a couple of these stories and you'll see what I'm talking about. So this story came from 2010, a gentleman by the name of Noel. He was working in his office building. It was July. It was hot evening, and he's there on the night shift. And the building is wired with all the video cameras. You can see the outside of the building and all the entrances and that stuff. And every floor has a couple sets of these cameras where you can look up and see what's happening throughout the building and also on the outside. So it's one of those, he's there by himself pretty much because, like I said, he's night shift. He's just the only guy on that floor. and he knows it. He goes outside to smoke a cigarette, and when he's outside, he just gets this terrible feeling that something horrendous is out there, you know, like where you don't know why you're scared, but you're really scared. The hair on the back of your neck is coming up, and you just get that really creepy feeling. And he
Spidey
looks
sense,
up.
like you said. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Spidey sense is what I've always called it, the Spidey sense. So he looks up, and across the street, there are two teenage boys. They appear to be, you know, maybe 12 and 14 years old, and they're sort of staring at him intently. Like they don't blink, they're just staring. And it's a creepy feeling. It's the middle of the night. He's out there to, you know, get his cigarette and what have you. And he decides that maybe they're going to jump him. You know, people do crazy crap these days. So he quickly puts the cigarette out, disposes of it, and goes back in and locks the door, right? He goes up to his floor. He's kind of chasing the thoughts through his head, like, why am I being so scared of this thing? You know, it's just two teenagers. They shouldn't have been out in the middle of the night. Probably not up to any good. You're fine. You're locked in the building. You're fine. He gets upstairs and he sits down in his cubicle and he looks up at the camera, still feeling a little jittery. And there's one of them in the front of the camera at the front door. And the second one steps into the frame. And he's like, what the crap? They're literally like trying the door to see if they can get the door open. And then the one steps out of the frame and he starts watching, and he appears in the back of the building trying the door. So now he's absolutely sure they're up to no good, and this no good has something to do with him. So he gets up and he walks over and he's watching the camera. And it was as soon as he gets close to the camera, to the screen, this one in the front looks directly up at him. He can see it has no whites to its eyes. Its eyes are completely black, and it grins. And he thinks it's beckoning to him like this, like, come on, let us in. And he thinks, I've got to call the police. And it goes like this, like, just stop. And he's like, it's like this thing can hear what I'm thinking. And he decides that, you know, there's just something really creepy about this. And then the one in the back returns to the front, and he's standing there beside his buddy grinning. He sees he has no color, you know, just black eyes. So this goes on for a little while, and for a few minutes, and he's like, that's it, I'm done, I'm calling the cops. So he calls the police, and he's standing there watching the screen going, there are these two teenage boys. I know it's going to sound crazy. They're trying the doors, and I've got them on camera, and I've got them on video, and I'm pretty sure they're trying to break in here. They know I'm inside. I think they want to rob me. So the cops come out, right? They get out there, and he's watching the boys on the screen the whole time. He's completely not doing anything else. He's just watching these kids as they go back and forth from door to door and what have you, right? And the cops come, they call him and they say, we're at the front door. Can you see us? And he's like, yes. Are they out there? And they're like, we don't see anything. And he's like, okay, well, I'm coming down to let you in. I'll show you. And he comes out downstairs, and one of the cops that walked around to the back door, and then he'd come back around. He's like, there's nobody out back here either. So they go inside the building. He takes them upstairs, and he's like, I know this sounds insane, but they were there. They were there 30 seconds ago. They were there until you pulled up. And then I looked away for a second. When I looked back, they were gone. And I know I have them on video, though. We record all this stuff. We race over it every 7 days, so it's got to be on video. So he goes into the office. He pulls up the video. He knows the timestamp for when he originally saw them because that was break time. So he pulls the video up to that point. You see him outside smoking. You see him looking kind of antsy, like looking around and quickly putting the cigarette out in the thing and rushing back in and locking the door and trying it, going up the stairs, and then it just stops. Like it's all fuzzy and scrambled and what have you. All of a sudden, he's like, that's okay, it's fine. The one on the front door, I got them on the front door. Then you'll see what I'm talking about. So he goes and he pretty much knows what time frames, and he pulls it up, and there's nothing on the front. Nothing. The door jiggles. Like you can see the door jiggling like somebody's jerking at it.
Wow.
but
Okay.
you
Mhm.
don't see the person doing it. And the cops are like, what was that? And he's like, that's them. That's them. Where are they? He couldn't explain it, but they weren't there. But the imprint of their actions was.
That's bizarre.
It is, but that is not actually a new thing. So these things are getting more aggressive from the looks of it. Like, okay, the original stories were always they wanted to be in your home, they needed to be in your car. They would say things like, I need a ride home, I'm lost. Can I use your phone to call my mom? Stuff like that. And but you would always get this creepy feeling. Now they're getting crazier. So here's a story that I thought was really fascinating. So there's this 12-year-old boy. He's in his mom's car at a salon in the mall, right? And he didn't want to go into the hair salon while she got her hair done, frankly. That
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
did not
Okay. Yeah. I
appeal to a
mhm.
12-year-old boy at all. So
Yep.
he's, playing around on his phone and, just hanging out there. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he gets this on the window and he looks up and there's this boy, one boy. And he says, the kid had really dark eyes. It had a hoodie on. You couldn't see his face really well at first. And the lighting in those parking lots and stuff is sometimes pretty nasty. You can't really see well. It's that fluorescent artificial type lighting and what have you. And it's just, it's a little bit after dark and she had a late appointment and the kid yells, you must let me in. And something about this kid just didn't strike him as somebody he wanted to let in.
Yeah.
And he reached over and very quickly tapped the button to make sure the car was locked. And he goes, no, I don't know you. Go away. The boy pounds on it again and he's screaming, you have to let me in. This scares this kid so bad. The boy literally sort of slides down under the passenger side, under the dash, and kind of hides. And he's like, he doesn't want any part of this. He just doesn't even want to look at them. The kid, at one point, the kid's hoodie slides back a little and he sees he has those big black eyes. So he keeps praying his mom will hurry up. Please, God, my mom, hurry up. Please, God, let my mom hurry up. And this guy's trying the card handles and what have you. And finally, he goes away. And his mom comes rushing out about 15 minutes later. And she's literally running. He hears her hit the button to unlock the car. And she jumps in and she says, are you okay? And he's like, yeah, I'm fine now. And she said, who was that boy with the black eyes? And he says, what do you mean? How do you know about him? She said, he came into the salon, asked for the lady that had the red car, and said you were locked in and he needed the car keys to let you out.
Oh my.
That is a lot more aggressive than they're now plotting. They're now coming up with plans and they're doing other stuff that's insane. So we'll talk about that as we go through.
I suppose handing somebody keys would imply consent to open it. Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked before about how these all kinds of evil entities, they have a set of rules they have to live by, but they're not beyond tricking you to think that that you gave consent without realizing you gave consent. And it was just, and they're getting much more aggressive. So we're going to do another story where this kind of explains this. So there's this guy and he's hanging out. He's in his late 30s, early 40s. He's hanging out at home. It's a Saturday. He's by himself. His family's gone. So he decides he's just going to watch some TV and do some chores around the house, kind of a deal. And as he's doing that, he hears this pounding on the door and he thinks, well, at first he thinks, well, that's weird. Why don't they use the doorbell? We have a doorbell. And he thinks, well, maybe it's somebody outside and it's just the way it sounds. I'll give it a minute. So he gives it a couple minutes, but the sound gets louder and faster, as though somebody's pounding really hard on the door. So he finally gets up and he goes over and he's kind of watching a TV show. So he's doing one of those, like really not paying attention. And out the side window, he can see what looks like two teenage boys. His thought was they're probably selling, some subscriptions or something. because, you know, they're standing there looking down at the floor on the porch and just being, you know, not bored. They look bored, frankly. And so he opens the door and he says, "What can I do for you?" And one of them says, "We need to come in. I have to pee." And he pushes past him and just goes straight in. And the other one screams, "We're lost. I need the telephone," and pushes past him and goes straight in. And the guy's like, "What the heck?" So he goes to the stairs and he yells, "It's up on the left, third door. Hurry up." And as he does, the kid turns around and grins at him and looks down from the top of the stairs, and he sees for the first time this kid has black eyes. And suddenly the hackles go up. He's terrified. He's sick in the stomach. He can smell what he describes as a musty odor suddenly wafting through the area. And he realizes he's pinned between these two things, whatever they are, because the other boy's right behind him. And he turns around and he looks at the other boy and he hears the thumping of the one upstairs coming back down. And he says, "You know, what are you doing here? You need to get out. You need to leave. Get going." And the one boy grins at him and the other one laughs and he says, "We've come to get you. You need to come with us now." And he's debating whether he can take these on. And at the same time, he describes it as having a feeling of being prey. And he doesn't know exactly what to do. So he ends up pushing past the one boy that was near the stairs, and he sort of slams past that kid who's on the steps, up the stairs, bolts into his bedroom, slams the door shut, locks the door. He can hear them outside the door, and they're trying the doorknob, pounding on the door, and they keep saying, "You know, you got to come with us now. You need to come with us. We came to get you." And he's completely frightened. He left his cell phone downstairs. He doesn't have a phone upstairs. So he's just sort of stuck.
There is a fly on your camera.
I cannot help that. It is. I had grandchildren the other day and I am still killing them from.
Oh my.
Crazy. I apologize.
Hmm.
I keep trying to keep them off and they're just not listening.
Hmm.
So anyway, you know, he ends up sitting there all evening, and eventually the room gets quiet. Outside the hallway, it gets quiet, and he's afraid to open the door because now it's dark, and somehow that just makes it seem harder, worse, you know. So he waits all night long in his room, and in the morning he opens the door real early and he creeps out, and there's nothing there, nobody's there, and he thinks at first they're gone and it's okay. And then when he turns around and looks at his bedroom door, etched on the door with a magic marker is the word "soon."
Oh my.
I know, it's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, what happened to the good old black-eyed children that our parents will be here soon?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, that's how it started. It's been that way for 30 years, but there's suddenly this aggression coming out, and they're changing things. So this next one will kind of give you the idea. This one is from British Columbia, and it's basically a guy who went to the movies to see a spooky movie in his area theater, and he gets home, and while he walked into the theater and he walked out to walk home, he only lived a couple blocks away. And he gets home and he just has that terrible feeling that somebody's following you the whole way home. And he keeps looking back and he doesn't see anybody. He finally gets to the house, and the closer he gets to home, the more frightened he becomes. So he opens the door of his house, and standing on to go in, and standing on the front porch right beside him suddenly is a beautiful young woman. She's a young girl. She looks like she's about 17. She's over 6 foot tall. She has long blonde hair, and she says to him, "May I enter the premises?" And she has solid black eyes. He's absolutely terrified. He yells, he pulls the key out of the lock and jumps into the house, slams the door, and he sees her standing there looking in the windows on the porch, like watching him, and she keeps yelling, "May I enter your premises? May I enter your premises?" And he goes upstairs and he gets a gun and he pulls a chair into the corner by the front door where he can see her. And he just sits there all night. He waits it out. And he said, I didn't know what to make of this. And in the morning, he goes out to try to, to take a look around, and she's gone. There's no trace of her, but he can't explain what it was. And he's like, I'm telling you, I know I watched a spooky movie. I know that people might say that creeped me out, but this was completely different. And she was just not there when I walked on the porch. And within the 3 seconds it took for me to pull the key out and put it in the lock, suddenly she's right beside me. And it's interesting that she's appearing as a tall, almost like a Nordic type, blonde, girl. You hear them as dark hair, dark eyed. So
yeah, when you said that, the first thing went through my mind is, I mean, there's supposed to be at least one race of Nordic type aliens that are visiting Earth too. So I suppose he didn't ask to count her teeth.
I don't think so. I think he just ran away and got a gun.
Yeah.
So the next story that came up is like they're now deliberately using fear tactics in ways they didn't. Like you said, the old stories, just may I use your phone, and you felt frightened, but you couldn't justify it because it's a 10-year-old saying, can I use your phone? I'm lost. This is a woman who's sitting up in her own home. It's about 2015, and she's got a cat, and the cat's laying on the couch beside her. She's petting the cat and watching a movie, and all of a sudden the cat jumps up, starts hissing and growling, and just slinks into the laundry room, wedges itself between the washer and the dryer. And she follows the cat, and she's like, what is wrong with you? And the cat's just in there going, and there's nothing's changed. And then she hears somebody knocking at her door, and she thinks, it was Halloween night, so did somebody miss the memo that trick or treat was the night before? Kind of a deal, right? So she opens the door when she sees this little boy and a little girl standing out there, and they're not dressed in Halloween costumes. They weren't holding any bags or buckets, just standing there with their heads down. And the little girl looked up a little bit, and she whispered, we need to go inside. And the boy looked up, and he starts grinning, and this horrible feeling of fear hits her, makes her literally sick, because their eyes are black. Both of them, their eyes are completely black. And the boy says, we need to get inside now. And she staggers backwards, shuts the door, calls the police. Now it had snowed earlier that night. And the police come, and she has told them this crazy story about these two kids on her porch and blah, blah, blah. And the police officer brought her outside, and he said, there's one set of footprints in the snow. Those are mine from just arriving. Nobody could have been here. She's like, they were. I saw them. And she said it took her about 3 months, but later on, about 3 months later, she was in a shed outside her house, like digging around for gardening tools and stuff like that. And 3 or 4 months later, and she finds a bed, like a nest, big enough for a small person, to be sleeping there. So she calls the police, and they're like, what do we tell you? They must be a vagrant. She said, all I can tell you is I believe that they were stalking me, and they were sleeping in my shed.
Well, you'd think the same occupancy rules would apply to any structure on your property if they had to ask. But
we're going to talk about that in a minute here. So one of the things that there's a couple people who've been writing books on this that have come up with some really interesting stuff. And one of them is Nick Redfern. Nick Redfern is, he's on the Sci-Fi Channel. You've seen him all over the place. He's got multiple books, and he's a phenomenal investigator. And he wrote a book on black-eyed children. And in this book, called The Black Diary, he wrote the book, I think it came out 2018, 2019, something like that. And 2018, spring of 18. That's going to be important. So a couple weeks after the book is out, a person who was a fan of his reached out to him and said, something crazy has happened, and I don't know how else to tell. So I bought your book, the Black Diary, and I read most of it, and I went to bed a couple nights after I read the book. And I don't know why the two things go together, but basically this is the story that this guy told, Nick Redfern, that he woke up in the middle of the night, absolutely petrified. He could not move, almost like sleep paralysis, like he physically couldn't move. And when he rolled his head sideways and looked, there were two children in black hoods, and their eyes, he could see enough from the light from the streetlights to see that their eyes were completely black. And he said he had a horrible, his head was pounding. He would end up having a rash that would take days to go away after all of this. And he said that the children were pale. Their skin was pale. They had those black hoodies on. And he said within seconds of him seeing them, the room suddenly flooded with light. It was, and I'm going to read it exactly the way Nick wrote it. Okay. Ron's bedroom was flooded with apocalyptic images of a flattened of millions of dead and of the sky filled with blackness. He knew this was what the cause was. A huge nuclear mushroom cloud dominated what was left of the city. Suddenly the image was gone, as were the children in black. Ron told me that he had nearly sleepless nights for the next 3 nights. They have not returned, nor have the nightmares, but gave him an apocalyptic vision. Now, after Redfern writes this book and he gets this story, he's traveling all over the world, signing books and what have you. He's big time. And he comes across this gentleman by the name of Adrian Clark. And Adrian is in England, and Adrian tells the story that he woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning. It was September of 2018. He had read some of the book. He had not read the whole book. And standing at the foot of his bed were these two black-eyed children, and their eyes were completely blacked out, and they were wearing orange robes. That was the only thing that was different. And similar to what happened to Ron, he suddenly felt his room light up, and he saw this horrible nightmarish vision of millions of people laying dead. The earth was just devastated. Fires and buildings collapsed and bodies strewn everywhere. And he knew it had something to do with a nuclear apocalypse. And he fought against being pinned down. He couldn't move. He finally eventually managed to get his arm to move. And when he broke the paralysis, the whole thing went away, including the kids. They just poofed right out of being. Now, I'm going to tell one more story that Nick tells from the same set. Same thing. He's in Mothman Festival down in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. He's doing a lecture on the book, The Black Diary. There's a girl who comes up to him and she says, I haven't read this book, but I've read some of your other books. But I picked up the book, and I have to tell you something really crazy happened. And this reason I haven't read it is because I'm terrified to now. She said she woke up in the middle of the night to a pair of pale children with huge black eyes, and one of them pointed toward the wall of her bedroom, which suddenly transformed into this great big screen, if you will, showing the images of a nuclear explosion. And she said, I don't know how I knew, because I've never even been to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but I knew what I was seeing was the city being destroyed and all the people dying. And she said, I don't know what to make of it, but I know somehow those black-eyed children and that book are connected.
It's interesting. Right now, I'm looking at the Amazon listing for that book, and on the cover, in the corner, there is a warning: just picking up this book invites them in.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's not how you sell books, but you know.
Well, it works for Nick, okay?
Oh, I guess, but yeah.
But think about how insane that is. Now that's breaking all the rules. Like, they weren't invited in.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, like the warning, I guess picking up the book invited them in. She did, or even thinking about buying the book. I don't know. One of the things that the first story that you told about the guy in the warehouse and seeing the two kids
Yes.
outside, at first I was thinking like, okay, they're projecting that into his mind. in some way, shape, or form. So they're not actually there, they were projecting it. But having the physical evidence of the door shaking, that kind of made me think something different like that. But some of these other stories almost, maybe it's a combination of the two, you know. But
Yeah.
it's almost like that they are a projection. So maybe you didn't invite them in, but they certainly projected themselves there.
And that's a
And yeah,
possibility.
mhm.
So I'm going to tell another story that's not, it's not unusual in a lot of ways, except the ending. And that's the part I wanted to get to. So there was this woman who was basically she ran a company. She was the director of a small company in a small city in the Midwest. The company's offices were in an area that had gotten rougher over time, and she didn't have the money to move the company elsewhere. So every time she would come or go, she would always be very cautious of her surroundings. She would, step out, take a look around, make sure there was nobody nearby, that kind of thing. And she does this like she always does it every day. She's going to her car to go to a meeting, and she looks around and she sees way down the street as she opens the door, two teenagers coming. But they're a couple blocks away, and she's like, "Oh, I got plenty of time to get to my car. No problems." So she steps out and starts for her car, and immediately it's like they blinked and they went 2 blocks. They're right by her. They look to be about 15 years old. And she looks over at them like, where the heck did you come from? And it's the same boys, it's the same clothes. And when they meet her eyes, she sees their eyes are black, and they grin at her. And she takes off running, and she felt very much like prey. This is the thing that you're hearing more and more. They felt like prey. She hits the door, shoves the door shut, and she's standing there doing that I don't want anybody to know what's really going on thing. And they're all looking at her like she's crazy because she's kind of heavy breathing. And they're like, "Did you forget something?" And the boys hit the door behind her, and they stop, and they're yelling, "Let us in, let us in." She realizes it's not locked, turns around and locks the door. And other people are looking at her, and she's like, "Call the police." And somebody picks up the phone to call the police, and a couple other people get up, and they're like, "What is going on? What are they? Who are they?" And the woman turns around and she screams, "In the name of Jesus, let me alone." And the boys freeze, and then they just disappear in full view of her staff.
Interesting too with the validation of other people
Yes.
experiencing the same thing too. So
And there's multiple stories about them being recorded on video cameras. Everything in this world anymore has a video camera attached, pretty much. So the idea that they wouldn't get caught is interesting. But I'm going to tell you a story now that I think is really interesting. So there was this married couple, and they did like they would take care of your property for you if you were traveling.
okay.
So they were,
Mhm.
you know what I'm talking about. Like they would do small farms and nice estates and little ranches and stuff like that. And that's what they did for a living. So you paid them to live on your property and take care of your livestock or whatever, and keep the house going and everything done while you were on a trip somewhere. And they took a gig out in the middle of nowhere on a ranch in the out Northwest. And there were no other houses around as far as you could see. It was just this little ranch. They had a barn with some cattle and chickens and stuff like that, and some horses. And their job was to feed the stock and keep everything moving until the guy and his wife get back. It is a really nice job. They love this kind of work. They don't have anybody they have to deal with. So it was really, and they got ride the horses. It was just a lot of fun, and you got paid really well to do it, right? The people were going to be gone for approximately a month, and they were counting their blessings. So so their names are Ryan and Tammy for the story. The first 4 or 5 days went really well. Like they got settled in. They were staying in this little guest house on the little ranch. Everything's cool. And they had a great time. And then about a week into it, there was this storm supposed to be coming, a big heavy rainstorm. And so they decided to go get everybody fed. You could see it coming. There was lightning flashing and the clouds were darkening, and you knew this looked like it was going to be a serious downpour. So they decided to go get the animals all fed, and they could hear the horses were suddenly kicking the stalls, and they noticed all the cats were running away and hiding, and they were like, man, this must be something if the animals are this hepped up about it. And the cattle were like bellowing in the inside of the pens, and everything was just really anxious. And so they split up and start feeding, right? It's just beginning to get dark, and they're finishing up when the heavens open up and this deluge comes down. And the guy, he's finished up with his stuff, and he dashes for the little house they're staying in, and he's soaking wet by the time he gets to the house. And he comes inside and he shuts the door, and he's just reaching for a towel when he hears pounding on the door, and he thinks it's Tammy. Like, did he accidentally lock the door or something? And she's out there in this deluge. She's going to be mad as a wet hen. He turns around and he goes over and he opens the door fully expecting Tammy. There's nobody around, so it can't be anybody but Tammy. Except it's not Tammy. It's 3 teenagers, male teenagers. They look to be, he guessed, somewhere between 14 and 16 years old. And they were standing there, and he said, I just felt like they were predators. And they said, you need to let us in. We are lost, and we need to call for help. And he's like, no. And it dawned on him that even though it was raining really bad, they're not wet.
Mm-hmm.
And he dashed from the barn to the house, and he's soaking wet. And then they say, tell him that they're coming in. And he said, no. And at that point, the 3 step forward together into where he can see the light from behind him is shining out, and he can see they have these black eyes. And one of them says, you're going to die alone, you know. And he's like, oh my God, they're going to attack me. And he's like, it wasn't like I was going to be attacked by 3 people. It was like predators, like ancient primordial dinosaurs were going to kill me. Like, I felt that level of fear. And they start laughing, and he can see their teeth there's dark stuff all over their teeth. And now he's thinking, is that blood? Did they kill Tammy? Oh my God, where's Tammy? I don't know what to do. And they're still screaming, you're going to die alone. You know that. You're going to die alone. You're going to die alone. We're going to kill you. You're going to die alone. And he slams the door shut, locks the door. A few seconds later, he hears pounding on the back window, and he turns, and there's Tammy standing there. And she's like, open up. So he opens up the back door very quickly, drags her in, slams the door, and he says, where are the boys? She's like, what boys? He's like, the boys. And he's like hugging her and almost crying because she's okay. And she's like, what is wrong with you? And he's like, where were you at? And she's like, well, I was in the pens, and I thought, well, I'll just stay in the pens and wait it out. But it got worse, not better. And I figured I better make a run for it. It's dark. And he tells her this crazy story, which she wouldn't have believed except for how insanely emotional he was. Like, he literally was crying as though he thought she was dead, and she suddenly found out she's still alive. And so the rest of the time they're there, they decided they're not going to split up. Something's going on, and they don't do the chores by themselves anymore. Like, they go as a team everywhere. Whenever the family comes back that owns the property, they're sitting down, they're kind of going over what all happened during the month, telling them everything so that they're all up to speed, and just having a cup of coffee, and, you know, they're talking about their trips and all this crap. And the guy says to Ryan, did anything unusual happen while we were gone? And Ryan looks at Tammy, and she's shaking her head like, no, don't do it. And he says, yeah, actually something did. And he tells them this crazy story about these boys. And she's sort of doing the, oh, we're never going to get work again kind of thing, you know?
Yeah. Mhm.
But to their surprise, the guy and his wife kind of exchange a look, and he says, I want to show you something. And he walks over and he grabs a CD, DVD, whatever it was, and puts it into the machine, turns on the television, and he says, they had a lot of electronic security around this property. And he said, we have been seeing this for months. And it's three shadowy figures that come out of the woods, stand out by the main house, and is watching it. You can't tell who they are, but you can tell they're humanoid, three of them. And he said, we've caught them multiple times on the cameras. And every time I see them on the cameras and I go to the door, they're not there. So they're getting a lot more aggressive. This is the weirdest story I think I've ever heard. So this is late 1990s, and this guy's driving cross country. He's in Arizona. It's the middle of the summer, and his AC goes on the fritz.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So he doesn't have the time or the money to like stop and fix it right now. So he's driving along in that awful heat with the windows open, right? It's getting dark. It's pulling off a little bit. He decides to pull over in this wide spot and like kind of look out. There's nothing for miles but just desert and mountains. There's no other people. He hasn't even passed a person in the last 20 minutes. So he finds this nice wide spot and he pulls off, and his headlights are kind of headed out into the desert, and he's smoking his cigarette, and his car windows are open, and a breeze is kind of blowing through, and he's just kind of like chilling for a few minutes, enjoying the moment, when he sees these two boys walking out of the desert right at him. They look to be 14, 15-ish, and they're wearing brown hoodies, which is so out of place in this heat. And they walk right up to the car, and he says, where did you kids come from? Because there's no towns. Like, he's seen the map. This is one of those areas where you got to fill your tank up when you hit a town, because it's going to be another, 150, 200 miles till you find another gas station kind of place. And they said, oh, we live around here. And he's like, really? Because like I was under the impression nobody lived around here. I haven't seen any houses, any cars, anything. And something about these kids just creep him out, seriously him out. And he decides to finish his cigarette a lot quicker. And they said, you need to let us in the car and take us to town. And he's like, I don't think I need to do anything. And they go, no, you don't understand. We need a ride. And he says it in an aggressive way, the one boy. And so the guy flicks his cigarette out the window. And when he does, one of the two boys grabs his arm in his vice-like grip and begins to pull, like it's pulling him out of the car. And he's fighting it back. And this thing grinned, and he described it as having teeth that looked metallic. And he's terrified. And the other one, he doesn't know what the other one's doing. And he manages to wrench his arm back inside of the car. And he grabs the key, turns the car on, jags her down into drive. And there in front of the car, standing, is the other boy. And he's grinning at him. And he said, we need a ride. Very angry. And he hits the gas and just shoots past this kid, knocks him down, keeps on going. As he's looking back in the headlights or the taillights and stuff, he can see the boy getting up off the ground and dusting himself off. And as he's kind of watching them and looking back and watching them and looking back, he actually sees the boy walk back to the other boy, and then they're just not there.
That'll wake you up.
Yeah, it would wake me up forever.
Yeah.
So, and so I wanted to tell one last story, because one of the things that's an argument for the idea that these are urban legends is the fact that there is no historical precedence for it. But there might be. The fact of the matter is, who would you tell these stories to 100 years ago? You know what I'm saying? So we're going back to 1906. There is a story that has been passed down through a family. And when they started hearing these stories somewhere on the internet, it clicked in them that their great grandfather might have encountered one of these, well, a set of these beings. So the story was, it's in Oklahoma. It's middle of summer, hot, sticky, and not much of a breeze. And the fellow's a farmer there in town, or outside of town, and he's sitting on his porch, just catching a little bit of a breeze. He's got his windows open, and he goes in the house to get a cup of coffee. And like you, he would drink coffee no matter what. And hears a knock on the door, and there's this young couple. They're maybe 16, 17 years old, a girl and a boy. And they said, can we come in and sit for a while? And he's like, we're tired, and we're walking from, they named one town to the other. And he said, well, boy, you've walked a long ways. You're almost to the other town. And he said, yeah, can we rest? And he's like, you can sit out on my veranda there and rest for a while. But the thing that was, they weren't dirty, they weren't dusty, they weren't sweaty. They looked pristine. And something about this whole thing just didn't feel right. And he was a little leery and scared. And they kept insisting, we need to come in. It would be more comfortable. No, you can sit on the porch, but it's cooler in there. We can catch the breeze through the window. It's cooler on the porch. You don't have to catch the breeze. Just that kind of thing, right? And then finally, the girl gets really angry, and she says, we're coming in. And he slammed his hand against the door frame, and he said, no, you're not. And when she looked up at him, because she was startled by him slamming the door frame, her face caught the half light of the kitchen window, or the kitchen light. And then he realized that she had solid black eyes. And he flipped his eyes over to the boy, and the boy stepped up and grinned at him. And he said, sir, we need to come in. And he said, I told you no. He backs up, slams the kitchen door, starts shutting the windows. And they're pounding on the outside saying, you need to let us in. You have to let us in. This isn't very neighborly. You've got to let us in. And the dog starts howling outside. And then the sound of the dog gets cut off. And he finally opens the door and takes a look out, and they're gone. They're just gone. The dog's in its box, cowled down, and they're gone. This was 1906. And the family heard something about a black-eyed kid's story, and finally reached out to one of the researchers and said, I'm not sure if this is what my great-grandfather saw or not, but this story's been passed down in our family for generations. So they're morphing in a lot of ways. They're becoming much more aggressive. They're breaking the rules. I mean, the 3 stories about the sets of black-eyed children in the bedrooms when people woke up, and the sleep paralysis and all of that, those are new. And what is it that they're trying to show us, this nuclear apocalypse? Why is that the theme they're sharing or using for fear or whatever? Maybe it's because it's our worst fear. For most people, it's our worst fear that they will foolishly unleash all of that crazy on the world. And now they're attacking people, trying to bite them, threatening to kill them. This is a whole different set of black-eyed children's stories.
And time must fly when you're having fun, because while you were talking, I thought it was just a couple months ago. That was almost 2 years ago. That was episode 6. Was the black-eyed children. So yeah, that's been a while.
Thank goodness, because I'm sitting here thinking, and I said it to Michael today, my son Michael, who's my archivist, as you well know. He was like, oh, cool, we haven't had one in a while. And then you said that, I'm like, did I make a mistake?
Well, yeah. You know what happens when you get older, how time flies? Well, yeah, time flies. Yeah, it was October of 22. My goodness.
But you have to admit, the reason I wanted to come back to the storyline is because these stories have gotten crazier.
I would agree.
And there's other things that are happening that we may talk about in an upcoming episode, where they're connecting up with other entities that are co-appearing with them now. And we'll talk about that one of these days. I don't have enough material to be completely sure that I know enough about it to speak with any authority. But as I go through the research for it, I will definitely keep, pulling pieces for that. The other thing is, there have been, and I didn't choose to tell any of these stories on purpose, 2 or 3 stories that I have come across where the person who's telling the story claims that a family member or family members were killed by them entering their home, when they entered their home. Now, there are always and have always been the stories about people who've let them in and then turned up with some crazy cancer a couple months later.
Mhm.
Or a terminal illness or something. Those stories have all, but I'm talking about literally murdering somebody. So I didn't tell those stories because there's not enough material to say that. But that said, the story about Arizona and that car, what was that boy going to do with his arm? And it was interesting to me that as long as he kept his arms inside of the car, he didn't reach in to touch him. But the minute he reached his arm out to flick that cigarette out, it was like game on.
It's certainly something to ponder. I mean, that's your, I don't know, that's your, when you're in your car, that's like really like your home away from home.
Yeah.
So there's got to be some rule about that in some way, shape, or form, at least. But
Well, yeah, I mean, we always had said that, you had to invite them in, whether it was into your house or into your car or whatever. But in this instance, he stuck his arm out of the car, and apparently that was enough to be able to get him.
okay, windows up, air conditioning on.
Yeah.
There's already a sign on my front door that says no solicitors or political canvassing or door-to-door sales, stuff like that. But
Kid,
yeah, I'm thinking I'm going to have to append that sign now.
Black-eyed children, men in black.
No demonic entities permitted on the premises.
There you go. So with that, I'm done. But I just thought these were really interesting, unusual stories. And again, we're seeing a lot of changes in this. And is it because it's an urban legend and it's morphing, or is it because they're frustrated that they're not getting through, and so they're getting more aggressive? I don't know the answer.
But my room just got like 10 degrees colder. Maybe it's just my perception, but wow.
Oh, so with that, I will wish you good night. You can say it. You can have the last words too. I don't care.
Good night.
Good night. Finally.